Hi, everyone. My name is John Svensson Holland, and I'm with the Hewlett Packard Enterprise StoreEver marketing team. I welcome you to this HPE StoreEver tape webinar recorded specifically for the Storage Technology Showcase. Obviously, things are quite different this year, so, like all good storage specialists, we had a backup plan. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by two of our storage experts, Pat Mayock and Andrew Dodd, to discuss the very pertinent topic of ransomware and whether there is a magic wand solution to make this ever increasing IT headache less of a challenge. Before we begin, Andrew and Pat, perhaps you both would like to say a few words of introduction.
Hi, Dawn. Yes, thanks for that. Hi, everybody. So my name's Andrew Dodd. I'm the Worldwide Product Marketing and Marketing Communications Manager for HPE StoreEver Tape and also HPE Storage Supplies, our storage media business. So as you can tell from my accent, I'm based over in Europe, across the Atlantic, and my background or my journey in tape really began back in 1997 with DDS3 and DDS4. Wow, some names from the past there. But I've been involved in the storage business since then through DLT, Super DLT, and of course LTO Ultrium. And I think over the last 18 months, I've become increasingly focused on this topic of ransomware, how it's been spread by cyber criminals. And so it's great to have this opportunity to talk to everybody here at STS about how LTO tape can help address this rising challenge. So thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. This is Pat Mayock. I'm with Hewlett Packard Enterprise, the storage media division. I work with our HPE reseller partners on large LTO tape deals, LTO tape libraries, and RDX storage solutions. I've been in the data protection market for well over 30 years, mostly with tape and tape libraries. I've been lucky to be involved with Storage Technology Showcase since the first event in 2019.
Thanks, Andrew and Pat, for those introductions. Let's begin with a nice, easy question to set the scene. We hear a lot about ransomware these days. It seems it's always in the news. Why is it becoming such an all around threat? Perhaps you could take that, Andrew?
Yes, well, without wishing to sound too cynical, the underlying reason, I guess, is really just market forces. We all know that ransomware is a type of malware and it generates revenue for the attacker. But today it's effectively become this kind of lucrative multi-billion-dollar business. So, like any successful product or service, there are plenty of people out there who like a piece of that action. So, companies hit by ransomware attacks are often forced to pay out anything from hundreds to millions of dollars to unlock files that have been maliciously encrypted. And the average ransomware demand, according to a cybersecurity specialist called Coveware, who do a kind of quarterly report, that was coming in at $154,000 in the final quarter of last year. And obviously, some of the most high-profile cases that we've seen in the news have, had Fortune 1000 type companies being extorted for much larger amounts. And that's even before you then put a price on the disruption and the damage to the order book or the company's brand reputation. And clearly, this threat of ransomware is universal. We talked about Fortune 1000 companies there, but SMBs are just as likely to be at risk as a large enterprise. So, at the end of the day, criminals know that their targets have backups, and they also know they've got sophisticated data protection platforms to make it harder for them to infiltrate. And so some of these criminal gangs have started trying to run online competitions, for example, to attract the brightest programmers, because they're trying all the time to hijack authorized credentials to gain access to backup domains. And obviously, that is hard to do. And some of the most prominent groups, like those behind, say, Maze or Doppelpaymer, kind of types of ransomware that you may have heard of, really they're acting like entrepreneurs, which kind of underscores the extent of the challenge that businesses and organizations face. And then just in terms of how big a challenge that's becoming, there was one study that I saw from another cybersecurity specialist called Bitdefender, where they estimated that the incidence of ransomware went up last year by 715%. And healthcare was a particular target for cyber criminals. And then in some other research from Enterprise Strategy Group, I read that 24% of companies are now experiencing weekly ransomware incidents, and for almost 20%, it's a daily occurrence. So, the bottom line is that cyber attacks are on the increase. Every business needs to take precautions, but that's the reason why I think we're hearing so much about it these days.
Wow, Andrew, it sounds like this threat is real and widespread. So, Pat, what's the best storage technology to deal with this rising threat of data and business disruption? As we're asking in the title of our conversation today, is there a magic wand out there that can make all of these threats disappear?
Well, it would be nice if that were the case, but to get right to the heart of our subject, the reality is that there isn't one single thing you can do where you can sit back and think, well, now I'm covered. I think the best approach is to build something that resembles a circular fortress of different layers of protection so you can provide both maximum data availability and maximum data security.
What might that look like?
Well, if you just take a look at the HPE portfolio, you might have an HPE MSA, Nimble or Storage Once array for backing up your data from a mission critical system like HPE Primera. Or you might be running a hyperconverged environment like SimpliVity. You could support all of these with HPE Cloud Volumes or another cloud backup system to give you offsite protection. But perhaps consider archiving data in a private cloud using HPE Apollo servers and software defined object storage like Scality Ring. And of course, underpinning everything would be us, the tape guys and gals in HPE StoreEver tape, delivering maximum offline security behind an air gap barrier. Now, I mentioned a lot of HPE names there because those are the ones I'm most familiar with. But in the general principle of layering your defenses is one that many experts are now recommending, not just storage vendors. The FBI gave an interview with Bleeping Computer magazine recently, and they said pretty much the same thing that I've just explained. Here's one quote from that article that sums this up perfectly. Quote, the best approach is to focus on defense in depth and have several layers of security as there is no single method to prevent compromise or exploitation, unquote. And that's the FBI saying this, not HPE or another vendor.
That's pretty hard hitting advice there, Pat. Andrew, do you have anything to add to Pat's comment about there being no magic wand solution?
No, I mean, I think Pat summed it up really well there. The reality is that each of these technologies, disk, tape, or cloud, I mean, they all have a place in the storage hierarchy. They all give you maximum flexibility over how you manage your data and deliver a really strong, multifaceted response to ransomware. But as Pat said, the reality is that these safeguards need to be layered up to protect your organization from ransomware and cyber attack. So there isn't, a one size fits all approach here.
I think that's clear now, but could you go into a little more detail about the kind of defense that you can build with a disk array, or the cloud, or even a tape library?
Sure, yeah. I think the thing to keep in mind is that all of these technologies incorporate some degree of data security against ransomware. So, unlike Pat, I'm going to stick to using HPE examples here because those are the ones that I know best. But take HPE Store Once, for example. It's a disk array. It can hide the data behind a bespoke API. So you can't use, if you're a cyber criminal, you can't use conventional command and control methods that are often exploited by ransomware criminals to access the backups. Um, we also mentioned SimpliVity. So the main cyber defense strength of a hyper-converged platform like SimpliVity or Nimble DHCI is being able to restore your backups really, really quickly. I mean, I think with SimpliVity, you can recover like a 1 terabyte virtual machine in about 60 seconds. So, that's phenomenal performance if you're able to recover very quickly, if you have access to that system. If we look at object storage, data stored in object format using Apollo servers with a software-defined storage solution like Scality Ring, well, that's immutable. So thieves can't actually change the core data itself. It can't be edited by a ransomware payload. They can only really disrupt it using other means. But the thing is that all of these three solutions, all these examples that I've just given, they're all essentially online. And being online, that means they are accessible. They're on the ransomware radar. So it's this interconnectedness which provides benefits like fast recovery times. You know, this internet interconnectedness can also make them vulnerable when ransomware strikes. And I know you're going to ask me, so, okay, what is the ultimate defense against a ransomware attack? But the answer to that question, of course, and without being too partisan, is HPE StoreEver LTO tape.
Sure. But, Andrew, in the nicest possible way, since I'm here to ask the questions that our virtual audience can't, some people might be thinking, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Since you work in the tape industry. So, Pat, why is tape the best last line of defense against this rising threat of data and business disruption?
Okay, so here's where the rubber meets the road. The compelling advantage the tape has always offered, but which is now more important than ever, is that you can physically separate data from the live environment. I can't stress this enough. We used to talk so much about the 3-2-1 rule for backup that it has become almost a catchphrase. We need to move on from 3-2-1. It's no longer enough. What we should be talking about today is the 3-2-1-1 rule. 3 copies of data on at least 2 different media, one offsite, one offline. That is why we imagine the ideal ransomware defense as being like a circular fortress I talked about earlier, with several rings or layers of protection. The reason why we say that HPE StoreEver tape is the ideal innermost last line of defense is because it's the only one that can be physically isolated from the network. Being offline, it's not prone to someone stealing passwords or credentials so they can access data and backups. And thanks to its hardware based AES 256-bit encryption and worm capabilities, the HPE with HPE LTO worm tapes are GDPR compliant and tamper proof. So it's secure in the physical world also.
Okay, but I'm going to keep pushing you on this point. Why can't I just invest in one technology to solve all of my problems?
Well, sadly, that would mean putting all your eggs in one basket. Data in the cloud is off-site, but it's not offline. If deployed correctly, tape is very resistant against ransomware because when a tape is stored securely offline, it's practically impossible to breach in any shape or form, short of destroying it. If data on tape is encrypted, as it always should be, even if you stole the tape, you couldn't access the data. Hyperconverged or disk technologies are great solutions to help customers quickly restore data to restore hosts and servers. No one connected to the tape business would suggest that you shouldn't use them. But if the thieves can gain access to the backup files with the right credentials, they can then delete or encrypt all of the backup files. We've seen numerous examples of this. So there has to be an additional safeguard. Andrew, do you want to say anything else about this subject or object storage?
Yes, so object storage, whether that's on premises in some kind of private cloud configuration or in the public cloud, object isn't a defense once thieves can gain access control. Okay, so they can't edit the immutable objects themselves, as we just said earlier on, but what they can do is lock access to the bucket, which achieves much the same goal. There have been numerous examples of cloud providers being targeted by cyber criminals as a backdoor to the corporate network. And once they gained control of the provider's infrastructure, they were then able to lock down the assets of companies whose data was being hosted. You might actually remember that last year there was a huge ransomware breach that impacted the cloud provider for a number of leading universities and non-profit groups. And the criminals were able to penetrate the networks of the customers, and who I said include, as I said, they included some really famous and quite well-known institutions. These were able to penetrate these networks because they were able to get access through the cloud provider. And unfortunately, that incident has sadly had multiple ramifications, including some legal ones. So, it is difficult. When it comes to storage, the basic message that we can give is that there is no one size fits all. And that's why we're recommending a wide range of options that reflect the relative value and availability of your data. And at the end of the day, you can choose. So we're not here to say only ever use tape. You can choose the convenience of the public cloud and object storage, but with the likelihood of having higher retrieval costs, more expensive hardware, potentially, um, putting yourself vulnerable to some kind of disruption at the cloud provider's side. Or you can choose the flexibility and extremely low cost of tape, but accept that there is going to be some overhead for managing tape rotation and offsite vaulting. Ultimately, it comes down to customer choice.
Surely, Pat, if companies want to recover quickly from a big cyber attack like some of the examples we've talked about today, they're going to need to do it quickly. How can they do that with something as slow as tape?
Well, that's perhaps what some people might think, but in fact, today's LTO-8 tape solutions are anything but slow. They have a compressed transfer rate of 750 megabytes per second per tape drive and a compressed storage capacity of 30 terabytes using a 2.5 to 1 ratio per tape. But disaster recovery is much more about success than speed. Recovering from a ransomware issue isn't just a question of how fast can we be operational, but rather, do we even have the data to become operational? Having 100% of your data behind an air gap LTO tape, which may take a little longer to restore, is way better than having just 10% of your data restored immediately. And in reality, it may also take a significant amount of time and bandwidth to retrieve a large data archive from a cloud provider's facility. A full offline copy on HPE LTO tape is the most cost effective way to ensure quick and complete recovery from any disaster. A 1 petabyte archive can be copied onto 80 LTO-8 cartridges and shipped almost anywhere in the world in 2 to 3 days. An on site tape that the company owns and manages is the least expensive way to archive large volumes of data and recover it.
But people seem to have perceptions that tape is expensive and the cloud is cheap. What's the reality, Andrew?
Well, as we noted earlier, the average ransomware demand is over $150,000, whereas an HPE StoreEver MSL 3040 tape library with 100 terabytes of capacity will cost you less than $30,000. An autoloader or a standalone drive will cost you less than $10,000. So, in the short term, it's very cheap to store data in the public cloud. Where it can become expensive and prohibitively expensive is if you need to retrieve that data on a regular basis. And obviously, with data growth accelerating month after month, year after year, then the expanding cost of the storage may become unsustainable because it's effectively a permanent line item in the budget. And as we were saying earlier on, the cloud is a data center you don't own. So you have to factor in service level agreements and other people's security protocols into your risk analysis. So I think once you look at the financial devastation of a ransomware attack, which can run into tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, even millions of dollars, depending upon the size of the organization, investing $20,000 or so in a mid range tape library, which can store many petabytes of data, that just seems like a steal of a deal. Customers who put HPE StoreEver tape or any kind of tape at the heart of their defenses against ransomware strengthen the protection they've already got from their disk, object, or cloud storage provision, and they allow the chief technology officer to sleep better at night. And at the end of the day, that to me is almost the business that we're in. It's the tape business, but it's also the sleep soundly at night business.
That sounds great. But in my impartial role of interrogator, perhaps I can ask you, Pat, to put some quantifiable and independent figures behind that statement.
Well, a recent report from ESG comparing the relative cost of tape versus cloud versus disk estimates that an organization could achieve cost savings of almost 90% over 10 years using HPE StoreEver for a 1 petabyte archive. ESG determined that HPE StoreEver tape would be 86% cheaper than the cloud and 82% cheaper than an all disk storage environment for a 1 petabyte archive over a 10-year period. One of the biggest reasons for tape's advantage over the cloud is that in addition to the cost of storing the data, which is a subscription fee you have to pay month after month, year after year, You also pay to retrieve the data. And if your data is growing at 40 to 50% per year, then clearly your OPEX costs are going to increase in line with the amount of data you have. And it may be challenging to predict your retrieval requirements in the future. Now, there are some cloud providers who promise no retrieval fees, including HPE for users of our cloud volume solution. But with data growth accelerating, the cost of storage by itself may also become unsustainable since it becomes a permanent line item in the budget. There is no denying tape requires a CapEx investment up front, but thereafter, its OpEx is minimal and fairly predictable. And over the medium to long term, the balance definitely tips in favor of tape for long term archiving.
Okay, so it's pretty clear that LTO tape has a key role to play when it comes to defending against the threat of ransomware. What is the call to action from today, Andrew? What do you want people to keep in mind after this discussion is over?
Well, I hope that what we've emphasized is that tape is actually a really useful and necessary category that still has a key role to play for IT managers and for their organizations. But again, I have to stress that this doesn't mean we're saying you shouldn't use the cloud or disk solutions like object storage. It just means that you shouldn't rule out tape. I think the most important thing I would recommend is that listeners and companies try to find the right balance. Build that circular fortress that Pat was talking about. It's like going outside in the wintertime. Just layer up to get maximum protection.
Pat, I'll give you the last word. Do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Don. No, that was a great summary. As I mentioned in the beginning, I work in channel sales supporting HPE partners. If you have any questions on LTO tape technologies and LTO tape libraries, please let me know. Looking ahead, a recent poll reported that 60% of users plan to expand their tape infrastructure. By adding LTO tape to your protection fortress, you are strengthening your cloud and disk storage strategies. These technologies are not competing with each other, they support each other. Everyone needs some tape. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew and Pat. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us at this Storage Technology Showcase event. I'm Dawn Svensson Holland, and you've been listening to Ransomware. Is There a Magic Wand Solution? Brought to you by HPE StoreEver Tape Solutions. Hopefully, next year we can meet you all in person, but until then, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you soon.